We're having talks with them now, and we're not flying anymore with 18-hour flights every time we want to see a piece of paper. We're doing it telephonically, and it's very nice. I make a call, or I have my people make a call, and you know the answer. I always like face-to-face. I consider it better.
The water south of Iran is too narrow for bluffing now. In the Arabian Sea, the USS George H.W. Bush has slid into position with the deliberate calm of a warship that knows every mile matters. To the west, another American carrier already holds the air picture. Farther out, a third waits inside striking distance. 3 supercarriers. 3 floating air bases. 1 pressure point on the map. And across that pressure point sits Iran, with anti-ship missiles on its coast, drones on alert, fast boats in their pens, and the Strait of Hormuz only a few hours from becoming the most dangerous shipping lane on Earth. The crisis is no longer about whether forces are moving. The forces are already there. The question now is who blinks before the first radar lock turns into the first shot. This kind of deployment does not happen for theater. Washington does not stack 3 carrier strike groups around Iran because of headlines. It does it because planners have reached the stage where options must be visible, credible, and ready at sea. 1 carrier can sustain pressure. 2 can fight and rotate. 3 change the geometry of the region. They complicate Iranian targeting, stretch Iranian surveillance, and give American commanders something far more valuable than symbolism: time, redundancy, and the ability to strike from multiple axes at once. That is what makes the arrival of George H.W. Bush so significant. A carrier is never alone. It arrives with escorts, submarines somewhere beyond the visible screen, airborne early warning aircraft, electronic warfare jets, fighters, logistics ships, and an entire command network designed to absorb confusion and keep operating. Add 2 more strike groups to that equation, and Iran no longer faces a single mass offshore. It faces layered naval power spread across a wider battlespace, capable of launching combat air patrols over the Gulf, strike packages over inland missile sites, and maritime interception operations across the approaches to Hormuz. And Hormuz is the center of gravity here. At its tightest point, the strait is only a few dozen miles across, with shipping lanes even narrower. Oil tankers, container traffic, patrol craft, and warships all compress into a corridor where every maneuver is watched, every emission can be tracked, and every mistake can become a strategic event. For Iran, that geography offers leverage. Coastal missile batteries, mobile launchers, sea mines, armed drones, attack boats, and shore-based radar can all menace the same patch of water without the Iranian Navy ever needing to win a classic fleet battle. Tehran does not need to sink an entire carrier to shake the global economy. It only needs to make the passage look unsafe. That is why carrier presence matters so much before a war starts. The purpose is not simply to strike. It is to prevent a cascade. If tankers halt, insurance rates explode. If a destroyer is hit, retaliation pressure becomes immediate. If a mining incident closes a channel, energy markets react before diplomats can even find a room. Every commander in the region knows the first 48 hours of a Gulf crisis are usually decided by perception as much as destruction. Who controls the sea lanes? Who owns the skies? Who can take a hit and still keep moving? Who has enough depth to avoid being pushed into a reckless response? Iran has spent years building the answer it prefers. It cannot match the United States ship for ship, jet for jet, or missile for missile in a prolonged open fight. So it has shaped the battle around cost, clutter, and uncertainty. Mobile anti-ship missiles can relocate before a strike arrives. Small fast craft can disperse in civilian traffic and surge in numbers. One-way drones can be launched in waves to force radars to work, magazines to shrink, and crews to make hard choices about what to kill first. Mines do not need to be smart to be effective. A diesel submarine does not need to dominate the ocean to make warships respect the dark water. Iran's military logic is simple: turn a narrow maritime corridor into a layered ambush zone, then force an outside power to either escalate hard or accept humiliation. The problem for Tehran is that 3 American carriers are not just more decks. They are a response to exactly that logic. With 1 strike group, the United States has to be careful about where it concentrates its air wing. With 3, it can divide roles. 1 can hold defensive counter-air and protect maritime traffic. Another can support strikes on missile launchers, air defense nodes, and command centers. The third can serve as the reserve, the feint, or the unexpected hammer from a direction Iranian planners did not want to prioritize. Suddenly the burden shifts. Iran has to guess not only when the United States would act, but from where, in what sequence, and under what rules of engagement. That uncertainty is poison for a defender relying on timing. Coastal missile batteries need firing windows. Drones need routes. Fast attack craft need cluttered darkness or sea state to mask their approach. Mobile launchers need confidence that they can emit, fire, and move before counterstrikes crash down. Carrier aviation, especially when backed by surveillance aircraft, satellites, submarines, and land-based assets, is designed to break exactly that confidence.
It hunts the chain. Find the radar.
Track the launcher. Jam the data link. Destroy the fuel truck. Close the road. Force the operator to shut down. Every broken link makes the next wave less dangerous. But the response window is brutally short if a crisis snaps. A missile battery on the coast can fire with minutes of warning. Armed drones can cross water at low altitude and appear first as faint returns in a cluttered picture. Swarm boats can sprint out of coves and fishing harbors faster than many civilians understand. In the Gulf, reaction time is measured less in hours than in sensor confidence. That is why ships drill until the motions become muscle memory.
Combat systems manned.
Helicopters ready for surface search. Electronic warfare teams listening for changes in the spectrum. Fighters armed before the order is even given. The most dangerous part of this kind of standoff is not the opening salvo itself. It is the shrinking gap between suspicion and certainty. So what does Washington do with 3 carriers against Iran? It does not rush them all into the narrowest water. That would hand Tehran the compressed battle space it wants. Instead, American commanders use distance as protection and reach as advantage. One strike group can remain outside the Gulf and still launch aircraft deep into the theater. Another can control approaches from the Arabian Sea. A third can support from the Mediterranean or Red Sea, complicating Iranian assumptions about axis and timing. The carriers become less like a line of battleships and more like moving launch platforms in a distributed air campaign, each one guarded by destroyers, cruisers where available, submarines, and a web of sensors that extends far beyond the horizon. The USS George H.W. Bush matters here because a fresh carrier changes the math on endurance. Flight decks do not win by drama. They win by sortie generation. Launch, recover, refuel, rearm, launch again. Keep fighters overhead. Keep electronic attack in the stack. Keep tankers available. Keep surveillance aircraft feeding the picture. If Iran tries to saturate defenses with drones and missiles, the American answer is not one dramatic counterpunch.
It is sustained tempo.
Persistent combat air patrols to thin the threat before it reaches the ships. Rapid targeting to hunt the launchers. Redundant decks so no single mechanical problem or lucky hit collapses the operation. And then there is the political message, which in military crises becomes its own weapon. 3 carriers tell allies that the United States is not improvising. They tell shipping companies that Washington is preparing to hold the lanes open. They tell Israel, Gulf partners, and every nervous capital in the region that the American military is building depth, not just posture. But they also tell Iran something else. If Tehran wants to calibrate pressure with deniable harassment, it now risks colliding with a force package built for fast escalation dominance. Not guaranteed victory without cost. No professional says that. But a force package able to absorb the first shock and still impose choices immediately after. Imagine the night the standoff turns hot. A tanker reports aggressive approach by fast boats east of Hormuz. Almost at the same time, an American destroyer picks up irregular coastal emissions. An E-2 airborne early warning aircraft widens the picture and finds multiple low, slow tracks lifting off from inland sites. They are not civilian. They are heading seaward. On another circuit, fighters already airborne get a new tasking. Farther back, crews on George H.W. Bush are called to launch additional aircraft. The choreography begins before television has a headline. Now the clock compresses. Commanders do not yet know whether this is harassment, a probe, or the opening frame of a larger strike. Rules of engagement matter. Nobody wants the first shot to be a mistake. But nobody wants to hesitate through the last safe intercept window either. Electronic warfare aircraft push forward. Surface combatants shift formation to maximize radar coverage and missile arcs. Helicopters lift for surface identification. A submarine somewhere ahead listens for screws in the dark. The carriers, massive as they are, become the center of a defensive organism that is already moving long before the public would call it battle. Iran's most dangerous option is not a single spectacular hit. It is a layered attack designed to overwhelm attention. Drones first to force radars high and outward. Then anti-ship cruise missiles skimming low from different bearings. Then fast boats dashing in, hoping to exploit confusion, draw fire, or close for rockets and anti-ship missiles of their own. Maybe a mine report appears in the shipping lane at the exact wrong time. Maybe a ballistic missile launch is detected toward a regional airbase to split command focus. The point is not elegance. The point is overload. Against that, the American answer relies on discipline and depth. Fighters intercept the drones far from the high-value ships where possible, because every cheap drone killed at range saves a more expensive missile later. Electronic attack aircraft work to blind seekers and disrupt control links. Aegis destroyers take the outer missile shots, then inner layers stand ready if something leaks through. Guns become relevant again at the ugliest ranges. Helicopters armed for surface warfare push toward contacts on the water, using speed and angles that make small craft pay for every mile they close. None of it looks cinematic to the crews inside it. It looks like checklists, noise, adrenaline, and seconds disappearing. This is where 3 carriers change the fight from survival to control. One deck can keep defensive patrols on station. Another can launch the strike package. The third can preserve flexibility, ready to exploit, reinforce, or respond to a second wave. If Iranian coastal batteries fire and reveal themselves, they can be hunted almost immediately. Hornets and stealth aircraft, if available, come in with standoff weapons, targeting pods, and support from jammers. Fixed radars are vulnerable. Mobile launchers are harder, but roads, depots, command vehicles, and communications nodes are not invisible once the network starts unraveling. Iran's strategy depends on staying hard to pin down. A 3-carrier posture gives the United States more chances to pin it down anyway. The engagement at sea would still be savage in its own way. Missile warnings. Decoys blasting into the night. Bridges lit by red lamps and terse voices. Pilots arriving over dark water trying to sort friend from threat from clutter. Small boats scattering as helicopters bracket them with warning fire and, if cleared, lethal shots. Tankers ordered to alter course. Merchant captains caught between commercial routine and a battlespace forming around them. Every intercepted missile would still matter, because one leak is enough to burn steel, kill sailors, and drag the region across a line nobody can casually step back over. If the United States chooses to retaliate beyond self-defense, the second phase becomes even more dangerous for Iran. Not because carriers magically erase coastal defenses, but because they let Washington maintain pressure over time. Sorties can keep coming. ISR can keep searching. Damaged units can be relieved. Magazines can be managed across multiple groups. One carrier can recover aircraft while another is launching. The rhythm becomes relentless. For Iranian commanders, survival starts competing with obedience. Do they radiate and risk being found? Do they hold fire and risk being blamed for inaction? Do they disperse and lose coordination? That is how maritime pressure becomes strategic pressure. In the most plausible end to the first clash, the immediate crisis ends not with a smoking carrier, but with a failed Iranian gamble. The drones are cut down in layers. Most of the incoming missiles are intercepted or decoyed off target. The fast boats that push too far are wrecked or driven back toward the coast. Then the launch sites that expose themselves pay the price. Before dawn, several radars are dark, a handful of coastal batteries are burning, and merchant traffic is being reorganized under armed overwatch instead of abandoned to panic. Hormuz stays open, but the meaning of that survival is harsh. Both sides have now tested the line, and both know how quickly the next exchange could grow. That aftermath would be felt instantly. Tehran would claim resistance and deny losses. Washington would say freedom of navigation was upheld. Oil would spike, allies would brace for follow-on attacks, and every commander in theater would expect another probe before any calm could be trusted. Once missiles fly in the Gulf, even a contained success leaves wreckage behind. Damaged hulls, exhausted crews, spent interceptors, and a region forced to live one alert cycle at a time. And yet the true power of this deployment may be that no full engagement ever happens. Militaries move at this scale partly to avoid the war they are preparing for. Tehran knows that sinking a major American warship or closing Hormuz would not produce a contained exchange. It would invite a campaign against missile infrastructure, naval forces, command sites, and the economic arteries that sustain the confrontation. Washington knows that a strike on Iran carries regional consequences of its own, from proxy attacks to energy shocks to escalation paths no planner can fully control. So the carriers do something paradoxical. By making war more ready, they can make the first shot less likely. Still, deterrence only works if the other side believes the force is real, usable, and politically backed. A carrier that cannot stay on station is a signal without weight. A carrier without escorts is a target. A single carrier facing massed regional threats can be impressive and still constrained. 3 supercarriers tell a different story. They say the United States is preparing for attrition, for miscalculation, for simultaneous threats, and for a crisis that may last longer than one news cycle. They say Washington is not just sending a warning. It is assembling an architecture of options. That matters far beyond Iran. Every navy in the region will study the spacing of those groups. Every intelligence service will watch flight patterns, replenishment routes, and escort compositions. China will look at sortie endurance. Russia will note command integration. Gulf states will measure reassurance against risk. Insurance markets will read the same deployment as a forecast of danger and a shield against it. In a maritime crisis, steel and finance move together. So do missiles and perception. For the sailors on George H.W. Bush, though, the grand strategy reduces to practical facts.
Wind over deck. Fuel flow.
Catapults cycling.
Spare parts. Sleep when possible.
Readiness always. Carrier warfare is often described in the language of giants, but it runs on ordinary people doing technical work under extraordinary pressure. The pilot trapping aboard at night. The maintainer turning a jet for the next sortie. The radar operator deciding whether a faint return is weather, traffic, or the edge of catastrophe. If this crisis holds, nobody may ever know how close those decisions came to combat. If it breaks, those same decisions will shape who lives through the opening hours. So the arrival of the USS George H.W. Bush is not just another deployment marker on a naval map. It is the moment the United States converts warning into posture and posture into leverage. 3 supercarriers around Iran do not guarantee peace, and they do not guarantee an easy war. What they guarantee is that Tehran now faces a military problem too large to dismiss, too flexible to predict, and too close to ignore. In the waters around Hormuz, distance has collapsed, choices have narrowed, and the margin for miscalculation is almost gone. When 3 American flight decks close in on one crisis at the same time, the message is brutally simple. If Iran turns the Gulf into a battlefield, the United States is already there.